The National Park Service is an agency of the United States federal government that manages all U.S. national parks, many American national monuments, and other conservation and historical properties with various title designations. It was created on August 25, 1916, by Congress through the National Park Service Organic Act and is an agency of the United States Department of the Interior. The NPS is charged with a dual role of preserving the ecological and historical integrity of the places entrusted to its management while also making them available and accessible for public use and enjoyment. As of 2008, 21,989 employees of the NPS oversee 412 units, of which 59 are designated national parks. The National Park Service is celebrating its centennial in 2016. History. National parks and national monuments in the United States were originally individually managed under the auspices of the Department of the Interior. The movement for an independent agency to oversee these federal lands was spearheaded by business magnate and conservationist Stephen Mather, as well as J. Horace McFarlane. With the help of journalist Robert Sterling Yard, Mather ran a publicity campaign for the Department of the Interior. They wrote numerous articles that praised the scenic and historic qualities of the parks and the possibilities for educational, inspirational, and recreational benefits. This campaign resulted in the creation of a National Park Service. On August 25, 1916, President Woodrow Wilson signed a bill that mandated the agency to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. Mather became the first director of the newly formed NPS. On March 3, 1933, President Herbert Hoover signed the Reorganization Act of 1933. The act would allow the president to reorganize the executive branch of the United States government. It wasn't until later that summer when the new president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, made use of this power. Deputy Director Horace M. Albright had suggested to President Roosevelt that the historic sites from the American Civil War should be managed by the National Park Service, rather than the War Department. President Roosevelt agreed and issued 2 executive orders to make it happen. These 2 executive orders not only transferred to the National Park Service all the War Department historic sites, but also the national monuments managed by the Department of Agriculture and the parks in and around the capital, which had been run by an independent office. In 1951, Conrad Worth became director of the National Park Service and went to work on bringing park facilities up to the standards that the public expected. The demand for parks after the end of the World War II had left the parks overburdened with demands that could not be met. In 1952, with the support of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, he began Mission 66, a 10-year effort to upgrade and expand park facilities for the 50th anniversary of the Park Service. New parks were added to preserve unique resources and existing park facilities were upgraded and expanded. In 1966, as the Park Service turned 50 years old, emphasis began to turn from just saving great and wonderful scenery and unique natural features to making parks accessible to the public. Director George Hartzog began the process with the creation of the National Lake Shores and then National Recreation Areas. National Parks since its inception in 1916. The National Park Service has managed each of the United States' national parks, which have grown in number over the years to 59. Yellowstone National Park was the first national park in the United States. In 1872, there was no state government to manage it, so the federal government assumed direct control. Yosemite National Park began as a state park. The land for the park was donated by the federal government to the state of California in 1864 for perpetual conservation. Yosemite was later returned to federal ownership. At first, each national park was managed independently, with varying degrees of success. In Yellowstone, the civilian staff was replaced by the U.S. Army in 1886. Due to the irregularities in managing these national treasures, Stephen Mather petitioned the federal government to improve the situation. In response, Secretary of the Interior Franklin K. Lane challenged him to lobby for creating a new agency, the National Park Service, to manage all national parks and some national monuments. Mather was successful with the ratification of the National Park Service Organic Act in 1916. Later, the agency was given authority over other protected areas, many with varying designations as Congress created them. Directors. National Park System. The National Park System includes all properties managed by the National Park Service. The title or designation of a unit need not include the term park. Indeed, most do not. The system as a whole is considered to be a national treasure of the United States, and some of the more famous national parks and monuments are sometimes referred to metaphorically as crown jewels. The system encompasses approximately 84.4 million acres, of which more than 4.3 million acres remain in private ownership. The largest unit is Wrangell Street, U.S. National Park in Preserve, Alaska. At 13,200,000 acres, it is over 16% of the entire system. The smallest unit in the system is Thaddeus Kosciuszko National Memorial, Pennsylvania, at 0.02 acre. In addition to administering its units and other properties, the National Park Service also provides technical and financial assistance to several affiliated areas authorized by Congress. The largest affiliated area is New Jersey Pinelands National Reserve at 1,164,025 acres. The smallest is Benjamin Franklin National Memorial at less than 0.01 acres. Although all units of the national park system in the United States are the responsibility of a single agency, they are all managed under individual pieces of authorizing legislation, or, in the case of national monuments created under the Antiquities Act, presidential proclamation. For example, because of provisions within their enabling legislation, Congaree National Park is almost entirely wilderness area devoid of development. Yet Yosemite allows unique development such as the Badger Pass ski area and the O'Shaughnessy Dam within its boundaries. Death Valley National Park has an active mine legislated within its boundaries. Such irregularities would not be found in other parks unless specifically provided for, with exceptions by the legislation that created them. Holdings for current specifics and a multitude of information, see the Quick Facts section of the NPS website. Criteria. Most units of the National Park Service have been established by an act of Congress, with the President confirming the action by signing the act into law. The exception under the Antiquities Act allows the President to designate and protect areas as national monuments by executive order. Regardless of the method used, all parks are to be of national importance. A potential park should meet all four of the following standards. It is an outstanding example of a particular type of resource. It possesses exceptional value or quality in illustrating or interpreting the natural or cultural themes of our nation's heritage. It offers superlative opportunities for recreation, for public use and enjoyment, or for scientific study. It retains a high degree of integrity as a true, accurate, and relatively unspoiled example of the resource. Special designations. Wilderness areas are covered by the U.S. National Wilderness Preservation System, which protects federally managed lands that are of a pristine condition. Established by the Wilderness Act in 1964. The National Wilderness Preservation System originally created hundreds of wilderness zones within already protected federally administered property, consisting of over 9 million acres. Marine protected areas began with Executive Order 13,158 in May 2000, when official NPAs were established for the first time. The initial listing of U.S. areas was presented in 2010, consisting of areas already set aside under other legislation. The National Park Service has 19 park units designated as NPAs. Budget. As of 2016, the National Park Service has an annual budget of about $3 billion and an estimated $12 billion maintenance backlog. The National Park Service's budget is divided into two primary areas: discretionary and mandatory spending. Within each of these areas, there are numerous specific purposes to which Congress directs the service's activities. The budget of the National Park Service includes discretionary spending, which is broken out into two portions: the direct operations of the national parks and the special initiatives. Listed separately are the special initiatives of the service for the year specified in the legislation. For fiscal year 2010, the service has been charged with 5 initiatives. They include stewardship and education, professional excellence, youth programs, climate impacts, and budget restructure and realignment. Discretionary spending. Discretionary spending includes the operations of the national parks, from which all park operations are paid. The United States Park Police funds cover the high-profile law enforcement operations at some of the large parks, i.e. Gateway National Recreation Area, Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and the National Mall. The National Recreation and Preservation Program and the Urban Park and Recreation Fund are outreach programs to support state and local outdoor recreational activities. The O&PS section of the budget is divided into 5 operational areas. These areas include resource stewardship. These are funds and people directed towards the restoration, preservation, and maintenance of natural and cultural resources. The resource staff includes biologists, geologists, archaeologists, preservation specialists, and a variety of specialized employees to restore and preserve cultural buildings and natural features. Visitor services. Funds go towards providing for public programs and educational programs for the general public and school groups. This area is commonly staffed by park rangers, who are trained in providing walks, talks, and educational programs to the public. There is an increased number of media specialists who provide for the exhibits along trails, roads, and in visitor contact facilities, as well as the written brochures and websites. Park protection. This includes the staff responding to visitor emergencies, and the protection of the park's natural and cultural resources from damage by those persons visiting the park. The staff includes park rangers, park police, criminal investigators, and communication center operators. Facility maintenance and operations. This is the cost of maintaining the necessary infrastructure within each park that supports all the services provided. It includes the plows and heavy equipment for road clearing, repairs and construction. There are buildings, trails, roads, docks, birds, utility pipes and wires, and a variety of hidden systems that make a park accessible by the public. The staff includes equipment operators, custodians, trail crews, electricians, plumbers, architects, and other building trade specialists. Park support. This is the staff that provides for the routine logistical needs of the parks. There are human resource specialists, contracting officers, property specialists, budget managers, accountants and information technology specialists. External administrative costs. These costs are bills that are paid directly to outside organizations as part of the logistical support needed to run the parks. It includes rent payments to the General Services Administration for building space, postage payments to the postal machine vendor, and other direct payments. Park partnerships. These funds support the use of partnerships to achieve park preservation. $25 million have been provided for FY 2010. These funds require matching grants from individuals, foundations, businesses, and the private sector. Land and Water Conservation Fund. The LWCF supports land acquisition and state conservation assistance grant programs. The 2010 funds are the beginning of an incremental process to fully fund LWCF programs at $900 million. The Department of the Interior and the U.S. Forest Service use these funds to purchase critical lands to protect existing public lands. Grants will be made to states and local communities to preserve and protect Civil War battlefield sites that are not part of the national park system. The NPS State Conservation Assistance Program distributes funding to states for land preservation. Construction. This segment of the budget provides for the construction of new facilities or the replacement of aging and unsafe facilities. Additionally, there are funds in the recreation fees, park roads funding, and the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that provide for other specific facilities infrastructure work. Additional funds come from the Federal Land Highway Administration for the construction and repair of park roads. Historic Preservation Fund. As the nation's leader in cultural preservation, funds are provided for a variety of programs to meet these needs nationwide. Two specific programs include the Save America's Treasures and the Preserve America. The Historic Preservation Offices makes grants available to the states, territories, and tribal lands. National Recreation and Preservation. These funds go to local communities to preserve natural and cultural resources. Among the programs supported are the rivers, trails, and conservation assistance programs that promote community links to parks, natural resource conservation and outdoor recreation across America, offsetting reductions and fixed costs in various accounts. Within this category are a number of one-time events, which are added or removed as the events require. Notably in the FY 2009 and FY 2010 is the removal of the costs for the presidential inaugural. Other savings are identified through reduced operational costs from energy-efficient retrofitting and the demolition of structures beyond repair. American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, otherwise known as stimulus funds. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 provides funds to restore and preserve major infrastructures within the national parks. Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is a $475 million proposal included in the Environmental Protection Agency budget. The Park Service will participate through the EPA in restoration activities in those parks that are within the watershed of the Great Lakes. Activities will include such actions as removal of dumps and fuel spills. Park will monitor mercury, lead, DDT, and other contaminants in 6 parks on the Great Lakes. Work also includes the removal of invasive species and education on how to prevent the spread. There are YouTube videos about the work being done in this field. Mandatory spending. Mandatory appropriations are those items created by other congressional legislation that must be paid for. They include the Recreational Fee Demonstration Program, which requires the distribution and expenditure of fees collected by the National Park Service. Other permanent appropriations include special funding categories to non-profit and state entities, which have been assigned to the National Park Service to manage. Miscellaneous trust funds includes funding sources that have been created by the federal government or private citizen, where the National Park Service or a specific park have been identified as the beneficiaries. And there is also the LNAMP WCF Contract Authority, which is the Land and Water Conservation Fund, a congressionally created source of revenues, managed by the National Park Service. Employees and volunteers. Annually, the NPS employs over 20,000 Americans with an additional 221,000 volunteers in parks who contribute about 6.4 million hours annually. Economic benefits. According to a 2011 Michigan State University report prepared for the NPS, for each $1 invested in the NPS, the American public receives $4 in economic value. In 2011, national parks generated $30.1 billion in economic activity and 252,000 jobs nationwide. $13 billion of that amount went directly into communities within 60 miles of a NPS unit. Nomenclature. The National Park Service uses over 20 different titles for the park units it manages, including National Park and National Monument. National parks preserve nationally and globally significant scenic areas and nature reserves. National monuments preserve a single unique cultural and natural feature. Devil's Tower National Monument was the first in 1906. National Historic Sites protect a significant cultural resource that is not a complicated site. Examples of these types of parks include Ford's Theatre National Historic Site and William Howard Taft National Historic Site. National historical parks are larger areas with more complex subjects. Appomattox Courthouse National Historical Park was created in 1940. George Rogers Clark National Historical Park was dedicated in 1936. Historic sites may also be protected in national parks, monuments, seashores, and lake shores. National military parks, battlefield sites, and battlefields preserve areas associated with military history. The different designations reflect the complexity of the event and the site. Many of the sites preserve important Revolutionary War battles and Civil War battlefields. Military parks are the sites of larger actions, such as Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, Vicksburg National Military Park, Gettysburg National Military Park, and Shiloh National Military Park, the original 4 from 1890. Examples of battlefield parks, battlefield sites, and national battlefields include Richmond National Battlefield Park, Bryce's Crossroads National Battlefield Site, and Antietam National Battlefield. National seashores and national lake shores offer preservation of the national coastline while supporting water-based recreation. Cape Hatteras National Seashore was created in 1937. Indiana Dunes National Lakeshore and Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, created in 1966, were the first national lake shores. National rivers and wild and scenic riverways protect free-flowing streams over the length. The riverways may not be altered with dams, channelization, or other changes. Recreational pursuits are encouraged along the waterways. Ozark National Scenic Riverways was established in 1964. National recreation areas originally were units surrounding reservoirs impounded by dams, built by other federal agencies. Many of these areas are managed under cooperative agreement with the National Park Service. Now some national recreation areas are in urban centers because of the recommendations of a presidential commission, the Outdoor Recreation Resources Review Commission. These include Gateway National Recreation Area and Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which encompass significant cultural as well as natural resources. The National Trails system preserves long-distance routes across America. The system was created in 1968 and consists of two major components. National Scenic Trails are long-distance trails through some of the most scenic parts of the country. They received official protection in 1968. The Appalachian Trail and the Continental Divide Trail are the best-known. National Historic Trails commemorate the routes of major historic events. Some of the best-known are the Trail of Tears, the Mormon Trail, and the Santa Fe Trail. These trails are administered by several federal agencies. National preserves are for the protection of certain resources. Activities like hunting, fishing, and some mining are allowed. Big Cypress National Preserve and Big Thicket National Preserve were created in 1974 as the first national preserves. National reserves are similar to national preserves, but the operational authority can be placed with the local government. New Jersey Pinelands National Reserve was the first to be established in 1978. Visitors. The national park system receives over 280 million visits each year throughout the 398 units. Park visitation grew 40% between 1980 and 2001. Annually, visitors are surveyed for the satisfaction with services and facilities provided. The 10 most visited units of the national park system handle 30% of the visits to the 398 park units. The top 10% of parks handle 61.2% of all visits, leaving the remaining 355 units to deal with 38.8% of visits. Overnight stays. Over 13.8 million visitors spent a night in one of the national park units during 2008. The largest number stayed in one of the lodges. The second largest group were tent campers, followed by miscellaneous stays. The last three groups of overnight visitors included RV campers, backcountry campers, and users of the concession-run campgrounds. Over the last 30 years, the largest change has been with RV users. Services consistently. The highest-ranked service has been assistance from park employees. Facilities. Among facilities, the park visitor centers obtain a consistent 70% very good rating. Youth programs. The National Park Service offers a variety of youth-oriented programs. They range from the Web Ranger online program to many programs in each national park unit. The primary work opportunities for youth are through the Youth Corp networks. The oldest serving group is the Student Conservation Association. It was established in 1957, committed to conservation and preservation. The SCA's goal is to create the next generation of conservation leaders. SCA volunteers work through internships, conservation jobs, and crew experiences. The volunteers conduct resource management, historic preservation, cultural resources, and conservation programs to gain experience, which can lead to career development and further educational opportunities. The SCA places volunteers in more than 350 national park units and NPS offices each year. The core network, formerly known as the National Association for Service and Corps, represents 136 service and conservation corps. These groups have programs in 42 states and the District of Columbia. Corps members are between the ages of 16 to 25. Service and Conservation Corps are direct descendants of the Civilian Conservation Corps of the 1930s, that built park facilities in the national parks and other public parks around the country. The Corps network was established in 1985. Youth Conservation Corps. The Youth Conservation Corps bring young people into a park to restore, preserve and protect natural, cultural, or historical resources. Enrollees are paid for the work. Public Land Corps. The Public Land Corps is a job helping to restore, protect, and rehabilitate a local national parks. The enrollees learn about environmental issues and the park. A dozen non-profit programs for Boy Scouts. The National Park Service works with the Boy Scouts of America. Members can become a Scout Ranger and earn a patch. The service formally participated every 4 years at the BSA Jamboree at Fort A.P. Hill, Virginia. Many Scouts have completed their Eagle projects in a national park, helping preserve the resources while furthering the Scouting experience. Programs for Girl Scouts. Girl Scouts can become a Girl Scout Ranger and earn a patch. The National Park Service works with Girl Scout troops through the Linking Girls to the Land